Hey folks, this is Clayton Collins, CEO at HW Media, and your host for the Housing News Podcast. This week's guest on Housing News is Mr. Mike Simonsen, the founder at Altos Research. I asked Mike to join us on Housing News this week to talk about how he uses active listings data, pendings data, and other real estate and economic data sources to better understand the U.S. housing market. In this episode, Mike shares a glimpse into the data that he is seeing this week, this really pivotal week in the first week of May of 2023, as we start to see total active listings climb into the summer. Mike also goes out on a limb and shares some forecasts that he sees in the market for summer 2023 and where he thinks we'll end the year in terms of total active listings. Mike gives me some lessons on exactly how we can best use information to understand what's happening in the housing market for real estate agents, loan officers, and investors, and also shed some light on some misperceptions and ways that people use real estate and housing data incorrectly. I hope you enjoy this episode with Mr. Mike Simonsen, founder of Altos Research.
Hi, this is Sarah Wheeler, editor-in-chief of HW Media, and I'm talking to Ed Messman, CEO at Rook Capital, about their shared value investment program. Ed, how do you engage investors through the platform?
Yeah, ideally, we look for investors who are interested in their local communities. These are banks, individuals, family offices, foundations, employers. They all care about the fabric of their own communities. They all want to see families move back into those communities and raise their kids. Those are the types of investors that we are seeking and who are most interested in what we're doing.
Thanks, Ed. And listeners, you can find out more at rook.capital.
All right, Mr. Mike Simonsen, welcome to Housing News.
Great to be back.
All right, folks, we're going to jump straight into this episode. We're going to talk about data, but we're also going to talk about some of the ways our audience should understand how to use the data that we're publishing at HousingWire and through Altos Research. Hopefully help you become a more astute follower of housing economics. And we have Mr. Mike Simonsen to walk us through some lessons and current data today. Mike, I want to jump right into this conversation that's focused on the current state of the U.S. housing market. But I want to review some primary concepts first. And in some of your recent content, you publish a weekly YouTube video. You've talked a lot about each week's data, but you also give some glimpses into what we should understand about the data. So one of the things that you've given a lot of time to is the relationship between supply and demand. And you've suggested that underlying demand is better than the data suggest. Can you go into this concept for us? And then we can dive deeper into the data we use to digest supply and demand.
Yeah. So determining demand in housing turns out to be really tricky. The traditional way we would determine demand in housing would be how many homes sell, like how many sold. And if sales fall, then that's because demand is falling. If sales rise, that's because demand is rising. But in the last few years, we've been in what I call a supply constrained market. So you can't gauge demand based on sales volume when you've got a limit of supply. And so what are some of the other ways that you might gauge supply? And so we can look at those, but things like we think about housing demand and we measure home sales. That's one. We know that that's limited. There would be more sales. People like to use mortgage purchase applications, but also if there aren't homes to buy, if I don't have a home to buy, then I'm not applying for that mortgage. So that's also a symptom of a supply constrained market. So then what do we use? What proxies can we use for demand and what other parts of the market? And so what we do is when we look at the active market, all the homes for sale, we can look at things like what percentage of those have taken price cuts. So these are transactions that have not happened yet. But if those sellers aren't getting offers, they're not getting traffic at the open homes, they know what's out there in the market. The first thing they do is cut their price. And so even before sales slow down, the price reductions tick up. So that's one. You'll also see it in places like the percentage of homes that are on the market now that went into contract and are now relisted or withdrawn and that now relisted. So we can see this relist percent climb or fall with demand. So these are like proxies of demand that are maybe more useful than like a traditional, like, well, there's only 4.4 million seasonally adjusted sales this month, therefore demand is down. What we can see right now is demand is lower than it was, a year ago and the last few years, of course, like crazy pandemic levels of demand. Demand is lower. Affordability is way down because mortgage rates are up. There are significantly fewer people that can buy homes now and afford the ones than a year and a half ago. That's totally true. What's obvious, though, is that we also have way fewer sellers. And so we have demand, sufficient demand for the number of home sellers that are currently available.
Really interesting. So I feel like usually when someone's writing about or talking about demand, we jump to the human side of demand and talk about demographics, talk about ages, talk about wage growth, unemployment. I think
household formation,
all really important topics, but you're tying this back to a more housing data level view instead of economic data view of actually looking at activity related to price reductions and foot traffic on open houses. That's kind of a different approach than we hear about in kind of most housing analysis forms.
Yeah, for sure. And the traditional housing data looks at sales.
Yep.
How many houses sold in April? And we'll know how many houses sold in April sometime in May or June. And so, but if you look at the active market, we're looking at how many are on the market, how many are getting delisted, how many are getting relisted, what are the price reductions. Like, there is such rich signal in that active market that traditionally, before Altos, nobody knew. And so none of the academic work knows that, none of the legacy economic analysis had that data to use. So they went to other, more broad, more macro factors. But now because we can watch every home for sale in the country every week and watch those changes, like we can see that we actually can use that data to understand what's happening.
Awesome. Okay, so we talked about the active market for indicators on demand. Tell us about how you use active market data to understand supply.
Well, supply is easy. We just count all the houses. Just count them all. And what's interesting is, you can count them week over week. We can count them year over year, and we can count the ones that get listed and go into contract immediately. And so then we have supply and demand in like one handy little chart, right? It's like you can see that this week there were 85,000 single family homes got listed, and 20,000 of those went into contract in a few days. So they take offers, they go into contract, and so that shows us that the supply. And we know that last year at this time, 99,000 homes were listed same week last year, and so 85,000, 15% fewer homes listed this year, and whatever 20% of those are already in contract. Almost 25% of those are already in contract, and like those are the well-priced ones, and they're like they may be investable properties, so it's like they're the most attractive ones, but that's the demand. And so we can see both of those, and just by simply counting them is how we know exactly how many are for sale. And that's also not been traditionally available. Like, I think NAR sort of forecasts, and they index based on a certain, sometime in 2000 or something like that. And but we simply count every house.
So it sounds like, we're taking a very quantitative approach to using active market to understand supply and demand. You think about the intuitive side of this, and that, I'm going to go a little anecdotal here, but the real estate agents that I'm spending time with seem to have a more positive outlook on where the market is today, which might be because of the active market. They are seeing increased foot traffic at open houses, homes selling quickly, not having to do price reductions, a lot of the things that makes the job better. Loan officers, on the other hand, still carrying a pretty high degree of pessimism, which may be because they're seeing a different part of the active market. Without enough listings, that job is just tough. Is that intuitive?
And they also don't have
application
refis.
Yeah, go ahead.
And they also don't have refis, which
Yep.
they did a year and a half ago, right? So that big part of the mortgage business is gone. And so it's only the purchases, and the purchases are lower, even though they would be higher if we had more supply.
Yep. Okay. So, our audience is a sophisticated group of housing professionals here. So they know where the market is today. Mike, are there any indicators in the active data that you're watching for that give you an indication of what's going to happen in the future? Are you watching anything that helps you make forecasts?
Yes. So there are leading indicators in the Altos data, and you can look at it this way: the house gets listed today, maybe it gets an offer in May or June, and that house then closes in July or maybe August, and so and then we hear about it in the traditional view in September, and so. But we can see right now, like the house is listed now today, and so we know that where it gets listed, and as you pointed out, like the agents, the realtors out there know how much demand is. They know how much traffic was at the open home down the street. They know if there were multiple offers, and so they know where to price each new listing. And in aggregate, they're really close to where the final sales price is. And any given home may be over or underpriced, but in aggregate, like homes they're priced very well. They're priced to sell. And so that active market all of it is leading indicator of what's going to happen in the future. And the folks talk about their home price forecasts for 2023. And a year ago, people were starting to, some of the most pessimistic forecasters were saying that home prices in 2023 would be down 20% this year. They are down, they're flat to, up a little bit or down a little bit right as of right now. And we can see most of the year already. Like we can see transactions through August already. And we can see that those prices are, while they're down a little bit, they're not down 20%. They're maybe down 2, or 4. They're in that range. And so that all of the active market is a leading indicator for transactions that are going to happen in the future.
That's really interesting. I've also heard you do some work around non-Altos data sources like Black Knight, default, and foreclosure information. Are you seeing any interesting indicators on some of like the default market that might indicate what we should expect later in 2023?
Yeah. So we have really few sellers now, and inventory is low. Inventory has stayed low through the year. And I expected after last fall, where the market was really cold, we expected inventory to climb first quarter, second quarter, but it's really just now started climbing 10 or 12 weeks later than I expected it to. And so the question is, where would inventory come from? Inventory could come from sellers, could be, normal move up, move down sellers. They are buying a new home and selling the old home. Those folks right now are either not moving, or they're moving and they're holding onto the old home with their cheap mortgage as an investment property. And so neither of that does not add to inventory. What else might happen? Well, in a slowing economy, we could get defaults, or you get at least distressed delinquent mortgages. You get people who lose their job for a few months. Their now outlook is dim. They then worry about making the mortgage payment. Maybe they miss a payment or two. Now they got to sell the home. And so the delinquent borrowers could be a source, especially in a cooling economy, of inventory. What we know right now is Black Knight pointed out last week that we have record few mortgages in any kind of delinquency. Record few. And so that says that, homeowners are in really good shape. Most of the country is still really well employed. Everybody has really cheap mortgages, and so the record few of them are behind on their payments. So even if there's all kinds of things that lose your job or divorces or like all kinds of life events that might make you miss a mortgage payment, and record few people have done so now. And if your mortgage is lousy, or you like the market conditions are super lousy, then you're more likely to skip a payment and say screw it or go into default. And right now nobody wants to do that. And so in the future, it'll take like big economic change, big job losses for extended period of time for us to start to see inventory from that. But it's like you lose your job for 90 days, they're now 90 days behind on your mortgage before you start getting into the like inventory coming. So it's at least 6 months of before the inventory hits after everybody loses their job. So it's like maybe late 2024, maybe it's 2025 before we see any inventory from distressed sellers. And that's what the Black Knight data is saying as of May 1st. Like this year's already gone for that inventory.